Today we talk about Operation Zverograd, a recent expansion for Dust Tactics. The scenarios in the expansion are set in the city of Zverograd, in the Sino-Soviet Union, the bloc that resulted from the fusion of Soviet Union and China in the Dust universe. In Zverograd, Operation Zverograd, you will find scenarios and you will find special new rules for the SSU units. This is the expansion that introduces the SSU to the Dust universe. And I have to say, I like the SSU very much. I like what the SSU units can do. And here you have the rules that explain how those units work. You have background material that flashes out the Dust universe even more. So this is an expansion that has been designed with the SSU player in mind. Definitely it is a must if you play the SSU, but even if you do not play the SSU, you can still enjoy the material so that you find in here. The scenarios are still playable. You find an SSU hero with a walker in this expansion. The hero is the pilot of that walker. And that is an SSU hero, so that usually is affiliated to the SSU, but there are rules here to tell you how to affiliate that hero to other factions if you do not want to play with the SSU. There's a building material here to construct a building, which you can use, of course, with the scenarios in the expansion, or to put together the scenarios. So for example, if you put together the building with the buildings you find in Operation Cerberus, then you have a lot of possibilities there. Terrain wise, the game comes with 2 posters, not with tiles, so that didn't bother me really. I can enjoy playing with posters too, but at this point, if you're a Dust Tactics player, you probably own enough tile anyways to allow you to play the game with tiles if you so wish, if posters are not your thing. In any case, rules for the SSU, components to play new scenarios, and of course new scenarios. Let me tell you a little bit about the scenarios that I played in this expansion, and then I'll try to put together some general ideas, impressions about this expansion and about the SSU in general, because it is thanks to this expansion that I finally decided to take my SSU army out of the boxes in which I stored it and give it a go. This is the first scenario in the scenario book. It is a scenario that has a very strong dichotomy between attacker and defender. Also, the size of the armies is not the same. The attacker has 300 army points to spend to build his forces. The defender only 100. So the defender is heavily outnumbered. The defender will deploy infantry inside that building, and vehicles can enter from any of these 4 squares here. The attacker enters from this bridge. That also means that because there are only 2 squares of bridge, it is possible that not all units of the attacker will be able to enter the board in turn 1. The defender also can place 4 cover elements, and they have to be placed in this area here. In this case, I placed the anti-tank traps there to block the bridge to slow down the walkers of the enemy, and then some soft cover elements here. Different combinations of elements, different placements could have been tested and experimented with, for example, giving the heavy cover to the defender, but this is what I tried last night when I played this scenario. What the attacker is trying to do is not simply to destroy enemy units. There are no points to score for that, but to bring this Carter here across the board. The Carter enters with the attackers and needs to reach that square there on the other side of the board. So the defender will probably want to mainly try to attack her, destroy her, prevent her from reaching the objective. The attacker will shield her, protect her, support her with attacks against the attacker, but this is the situation. And just because of the sheer size of the board, it takes 6 full turns for this Carter to move across the board. That means that in an 8-turn scenario, she really doesn't have much time to waste. She has to keep moving. This scenario is pretty tough for the defender. It is quite a puzzle, definitely starting from selection of units and then management of those very few units that you have on the board. There are very tough choices that need to be made at all times. Very tough for the defender, yes, but still very fun scenario and one that I enjoyed a lot last night. This is the second scenario in the book. 300 army points per size. That means a pretty medium size scenario. And one side enters from here, the other side from there, and the two players are trying to take control of 4 objective squares on the board. I marked them with these glass beads. There's a 4th one behind that wall there. Cover elements are placed on the board in these 2 areas here at the beginning of the game. However, strange thing is that all the elements are placed by the player that won the previous scenario, so that puts a lot of incentive for you to win the previous scenario if you're playing the scenarios by interlinking them in a campaign, because placing all of the elements, of course, all of the cover elements, of course, is a good advantage. As for victory conditions, there is a strange twist to the traditional rules here. At the end of turn 8, you count victory points based on the number of objectives that you control, but you do not simply gain, say, a point per objective. For each objective that you control, you roll a die, and depending on the result, you get a certain amount of points. The player that has the highest amount of points after the dice have been rolled wins the game. That bothers me a little bit because you may do much better than your opponent during the game and then be really unlucky in that final die roll. And this victory condition here to me just puts too much weight on a single die roll. And to me that makes the game a little less interesting. I played it using my own victory conditions. Basically, the winner is the player that controls the majority of objectives on the board. In case of a tie, the winner is the player that destroyed the highest amount of army points of the opponent. That's simple, and played that way, the scenario works. I enjoyed it a lot. It's a traditional, classic Dust Tactics scenario. It shows you what Dust Tactics can do, and because of the size of the armies, you have opportunities to experiment with different combinations of heroes, units, and walkers, and different types of terrain, heavy cover, soft cover, building, just different possibilities on the battlefield. As I said, classic, traditional scenario, but definitely a fun one to play. With modified victory conditions, at least for me. This is scenario number 3, the hidden lab, and you can see the structure of the lab here in the middle of the board with these 2 buildings here, 2 walls of impassable squares, and what seems to me to be a courtyard inside the lab. The attacker enters the board from the corners. There are 3 squares on each corner of the board which are available for deployment for the attacker. The defender can deploy inside these buildings or on the edges of the board, in the middle area of the edges. This, of course, presents challenges for the attacker. As the attacker, you definitely want to run inside the buildings as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, so that you're not caught out of cover by defending units that may appear pretty close to you and fire at you. Of course, then another attacker may come and fire at that defender, and another defender may come and fire at that attacker, but it is just better as the attacker if you can avoid the carnage and gain ground in turn 1. Here I'm playing with the SSU as the attackers and the Axis as the defender. I assigned assault abilities to the SSU units using commissars that allowed some of those units to reach the inside of the building in turn 1. And the Axis here is the defender. What the attacker is trying to do is to take control of 3 squares on the board, and I marked those squares with red glass beads. If at the end of turn 8 the attacker controls 2 of those squares, at least 2, the attacker is the winner, otherwise the defender is the winner. And another little note here on strategy and gameplay, I also wanted to experiment with the SSU helicopter that can transport and drop a a walker, and I used advanced deployment to place the helicopter right on top of that objective square and drop a walker right there. But we'll see how that plays out. In any case, the situation is definitely interesting. Turn 1 was fun. Did I specify that what you see here is the deployment at the end of turn 1? I hope I did. If not, I just did now. Now I'm gonna play the rest of the scenario. I hope you can hear me, but my daughters are taking a nap, so we don't want to wake them up, so we can talk a little bit about this game, and in particular about scenario 4, the scenario 4 of the Zverograd expansion. Here we have a small scenario, only 100 points per side, and the players need to use walkers. They need to have at least one walker, and as you can see, the way I've set up the game, actually both sides decided to rely on walkers heavily. What the two sides are trying to do here is to retrieve that crate there that contains precious VK material. If you know the Tactics universe, you know what that is. The two sides enter from here and from here respectively, and the side that enters from here must retrieve the crate, and only a walker can move the crate and bring it to that corner there, and the opposite is true for the side that enters from here and needs to bring the crate there. Strangely enough, interesting enough, in this scenario there is a special rule that says that the units that are eliminated can come back just as if they were deploying in turn 1. I want to see how that works, because I'm pretty curious. I just hope that that doesn't force the game into a stall in which units just come back, destroy each other, come back, destroy each other, and the crate goes nowhere. So far, though, the situation, I have to say, is pretty interesting. The map is pretty small. There's a certain puzzle quality to this strange space, so restricted by these two lines of impassable obstacles that create a corridor here. Well, I'm very curious about this scenario. I want to see how it plays. Let me play it, and then I'll tell you a little bit about it. There's also a fifth scenario, but it is pretty large, not so much for the amount of army points that are used, but simply for the size of the maps that you need to use. And right now I simply have stuff around my office and my house and too much chaos. I just don't have the room to leave that set up to play it. I'll play it in the future. In any case, this expansion allows us finally to try the SSU, and I have to say that I really enjoyed playing with the SSU. To me, the opportunity to take the SSU units that I had in boxes scattered around my house and put them together in an army and give them a go, that was a great opportunity. I really enjoy what the SSU can do. They're probably my favorite faction now, together with the Axis. Of course, I still have to explore them a lot, to figure out combinations and possibilities, but I just had a blast playing with the SSU. Helicopters, they just add so much to the battlefield. They're extremely fun to play. Helicopters that have huge fire potential, they can really do a lot of damage. Helicopters that transport other units, they can transport infantry, they can transport walkers, and I have to say that thematically there's nothing as fun as dropping a walker right in the middle of the enemy lines. That walker may not even survive too much if the walker really is surrounded by enemy units, but it is so much fun to play that you have to do it at least once and see how it goes. Other good things about the SSU, some of the special abilities that they have, they allowed them to hit with blanks instead of hits. Of course, there are more blanks on the dice than hits, so that's a good thing. The commissars are great, new units. These are 5 characters that can be used as a single unit with a single card that covers the squad as a normal squad, but they also have cards for each character, and you can split them and associate them and affiliate them with other units, and that is really great because, say, there's a commissar that has a bazooka, the commissar that has the assault ability, And when taken individually, they're not very expensive. So that allows you to customize infantry units with a lot of flexibility. You may give a unit a little bit of anti-tank capability by giving it the commissar that does that. You can give another unit the assault ability with the right commissar. And the commissars are not heroes, so you can also add an hero to a unit that has a commissar. Lot of opportunities there, real fun, great stuff here. As for these scenarios, I had fun playing them, but I have to say that these scenarios probably could have used a little more play testing. I just had the impression that there are little tweaks that I needed to do here and there, to add here and there, that surprised me because I thought could have been taken care of during play testing. The first scenario in which you're trying to place a Carter on the opposite side of the board in a specific area. If you use a helicopter to transport that Carter, you use advanced deployment, then you can win the scenario in turn 1 if you are the attacker. The scenario as is broken. You can use a gentleman's agreement and not use airlifts in that scenario, which is really necessary, I believe. The scenario where you roll dice to determine the value of the objective points at the end of the game, I didn't like it very much. I don't think there's a problem per se. If you enjoyed that, it's not broken per se. There's another scenario though that I found problematic in terms of balance. It is the scenario where the walkers are trying to transport a crate to the opposite side of the board. The problem is that one of the two sides will win unless the other side completes the objective. So actually there's only one side that is actively trying to transport the crate to the other side of the board, because the defender can win by simply stalling the attacker. And the defender will have an easy time doing that because of the fact that the units come back once they have been eliminated. And actually, it takes almost the entire length of the game, almost 8 full turns, for the attacker to go from the deployment area to the crate, to the area where the crate needs to be moved. I just find it almost impossible to win for the attacker. It can be fixed. For example, you do not give infinite resurrections to units that have been destroyed. Maybe you give them 1, maybe you give them 2. Maybe you make the scenario a little longer. That wouldn't be a problem, I believe, because the scenario is small enough, has a small amount of units. Even if you make it last longer, say 10 or 12 turns, I do not think it will overstay its welcome. Maybe units that have been destroyed come back after 2 turns instead of 1. I think there are ways to do it, but I was just a little bit surprised that those ways weren't in the rules as published yet. Bottom line, this is an expansion that introduces a great faction, a lot of fun. If you really want to play with the SSU, of course, the Operation Zverograd expansion is not going to be enough. You will have to invest in a lot of extra units, but I believe it may be worth it. These scenarios can still be played even if you're not an SSU player. These scenarios are a little less than expected. I expected them to be a little tighter, but if you are into Dust Tactics enough to know about Zverograd, to know about the SSU, and to be watching this video, then I believe that you probably know the Dust Tactics universe enough to be able to correct the scenario and make them fit your needs and desires.